She was never soft, not in the way they thought. She wasn't fragile, she wasn't weak, but she was quiet. Quiet in the way a storm brews before it tears the sky open. Quiet like the roots of a tree that go deep before the branches ever bloom. You see, the world mistook her silence for submission. They saw her patience and called it passiveness. They saw her boundaries and called it coldness. But what they didn't see was what she was becoming while they weren't watching. She didn't need to shout her worth. She didn't post every move. She didn't fight for people to understand her vision. Why? Because she was too busy working on it. She was learning, building, healing, reinventing herself in silence. While others were busy chasing attention, she was chasing alignment. Her silence wasn't a void. It was full of battles she was fighting quietly, full of decisions she made in the dark so she could live in her light. She was learning to forgive herself for staying too long where she wasn't valued. She was cutting ties with comfort zones that were keeping her small, and while they were counting her out, she was counting the steps to her breakthrough. She wasn't soft. She wasn't going to explain why she walked away. She wasn't going to beg for validation. She had already seen too much, felt too much, lost too much, and still she chose to rise. There's something sacred about a woman who chooses to grow silently. A woman who lets her transformation speak for itself, who doesn't need applause to know she's worth something, who doesn't chase closure from those who caused the wound because she became the closure. She became the answer. She became the version of herself that no longer settles for less than she deserves. They didn't know what she was doing in her silence, but now they feel the difference. This speech is for her. The woman who didn't retaliate, didn't lash out, didn't crumble. The one who disappeared not because she gave up, but because she was becoming. The woman who wasn't soft, she was silent while growing. Let's talk about how she did it and why her silence was her superpower. They mistook her silence for surrender, as if not reacting was a form of weakness. As if walking away instead of lashing out meant she didn't feel the fire burning inside her. But they never understood one of the hardest lessons a woman can learn in life. Not everything deserves your reaction. Some things deserve your silence, your distance, your evolution. You see, the woman who chooses silence isn't void of emotion. She's overflowing with it. But instead of leaking it all out into spaces that don't deserve her vulnerability, she takes it inward. She sits with it. She feels it fully. She lets it shape her, teach her, even sting her. So she never forgets the lesson. The world has trained women to believe that silence equals passiveness. That to be respected, she must always assert, defend, explain, or retaliate. But the truth is, growth doesn't happen in the noise. It happens in the quiet, in the stillness, in the moments where you choose to respond to life, not out of emotion, but out of clarity. And clarity doesn't live in chaos. She learned that real strength doesn't shout, it doesn't perform, it doesn't need validation from the outside. Real strength is found in restraint, in self-control, in being able to hold back what you want to say in the heat of the moment, because you know your energy is too sacred to be wasted on temporary people and passing emotions. She didn't choose silence because she had nothing to say. She chose it because she had too much to say, and none of it deserved to be diluted in a space where it wouldn't be honored. People wanted her to react, to explain, to plead her case, to make her pain digestible for them. But she didn't owe them that. Her story wasn't a performance. Her healing wasn't a debate. It was hers. She realized that the more she tried to explain herself to people who were committed to misunderstanding her, the more drained she became. So she stopped, she got quiet, not defeated, focused, because sometimes silence isn't a retreat, it's a weapon, a boundary, a declaration that says, I don't have time to repeat myself, I'm busy becoming someone you never imagined I could be. The silence became her cocoon, a sacred place where she could mourn what was lost, her illusions, her innocence, her younger self who thought love had to come with pain. And from that morning, something powerful was born, self-trust. She began to trust that she didn't need to be loud to be heard, that not everyone deserves access to her truth, that walking away in silence takes more courage than staying to fight for people who refuse to meet her halfway. In silence, she relearned herself. She peeled off the layers of conditioning that told her she had to fix everyone, that she had to earn love through sacrifice, that she was only as valuable as the version of her others found convenient. She stopped being convenient because her silence wasn't about others. It was about her reclaiming her space, her power, her voice, not the loud one, but the one that spoke to her in the middle of the night when no one else could understand her pain. That voice said, "You're allowed to start over." It said, "You're allowed to let go of people who made you feel replaceable." It said, "You're allowed to be angry, but don't unpack there, transform there," and she did. They say real queens don't compete. They rebuild, and she did brick by brick, in silence, no status updates, no revenge, no desperate attempts to be seen. She let her progress be the proof. Silence taught her discernment. Not every message needed a reply, not every argument needed her voice, not every betrayal needed confrontation. Some things need to die in peace so you can live in yours. She learned that not everything broken needs to be fixed. Some things need to be left broken so you don't break trying to repair what isn't yours to carry. And the moment she realized that was the moment she stopped pouring her love into black holes and started pouring it into herself. She started protecting her peace like it was her life, because it was. She stopped explaining her boundaries to people who constantly disrespected them. She stopped making room for people who only showed up when it was convenient for them. She stopped sacrificing her needs to keep people comfortable. Her silence was no longer just a space. It became her standard. She didn't ghost people. She grew past them. She didn't change overnight. She evolved slowly. Like a tide turning back to shore, like the earth warming after winter, there was no announcement, just movement, and when she finally stepped out of that season, she didn't have to say a word, you could feel it. The way she carried herself differently, the way she laughed without fear, the way she said no without guilt, the way she didn't flinch when people tried to test the old version of her, because she wasn't that woman anymore. She no longer needed the last word. She had the final say in her life, and if they came back expecting her to explain where she went, they were too late. She didn't owe anyone a roadmap to her rebirth. She knew this. The most powerful transformations don't need to be announced. They're felt. They're felt in the way she doesn't chase closure anymore. They're felt in the way she protects her energy like currency. They're felt in the way she no longer trades her silence for attention. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was a declaration. I'm not who I was, and I will never shrink to be her again. Because the version of her that stayed quiet while growing didn't just survive, she redefined strength on her own terms. When she disappeared, they thought she was retreating, that she was heartbroken, lost, confused. But what they didn't understand, what they could never understand, was that she wasn't waiting. She wasn't sitting in silence hoping someone would return or circumstances would change. She was preparing to become a woman so grounded in herself that she would never again abandon who she was for anyone who couldn't love her properly. She had done that before, given too much, too fast, tried to fix people who were committed to staying broken. Tried to water gardens where no seeds had ever been planted. She had spent so much of her past waiting for the apology, the explanation, the breakthrough, the change, but this time was different. This time, she realized the only thing she needed to wait on was herself, and in that quiet space, in the stillness that most people run from, she met the most important person in her life, her. The thing about silence is that it forces you to listen. Not to the world, not to the opinions, but to the whisper inside you that says you were made for more. She didn't run from that voice this time. She leaned into it, sat with it, let it guide her, and when she did, everything started to shift. She began to understand that growth isn't accidental, it's intentional, it's not a result of time passing, it's what you do with that time that matters, and while others wasted it chasing temporary validation, she was building a foundation. She woke up earlier, not because she had to, but because she wanted to claim her day before the world demanded it from her. She moved her body, not just to look better, but because she finally saw it as a sacred vessel, not a project to be fixed. She started feeding her mind the things that made her feel alive: books, podcasts, videos, even moments of silence that taught her more than noise ever could. She started journaling, not to document pain, but to release it. To make sense of patterns, to reframe narratives, to give herself permission to write a new ending. This wasn't passiveness, this wasn't waiting, this was work, inner work, the kind that no one applauds because no one sees it. But it's the most important kind, the kind that rewires how you think, how you speak to yourself, how you show up in every room, even if no one claps for you when you walk in. She stopped living on autopilot. She started asking real questions. Why do I keep giving more than I receive? Why do I settle for almost loves and half efforts? Why do I ignore red flags just to feel wanted? And when she answered them, something shifted. She stopped blaming others. She stopped waiting for closure. She took accountability for the version of herself that tolerated less, and then buried that version with love and grace. She was no longer focused on proving herself. She was focused on improving herself, quietly, consistently, not for a glow-up photo, not to get him back, not to make anyone jealous for her, because she finally believed she deserved to feel whole, not just wanted. She built habits, not because they were trendy, but because they grounded her. She meditated when the anxiety hit. She said no when her body said no, even if her people pleasing wanted to say yes. She unfollowed, unsubscribed, unlearned. She decluttered her life, physically, emotionally, mentally. She made space for herself. You see, real preparation doesn't always look productive on the outside. To someone else, she might have seemed distant, cold, withdrawn. But she was doing the work of a woman who's done with surviving and ready to thrive. She realized that being busy isn't the same as being fulfilled, so she stopped overcommitting just to prove she could do it all. She started choosing peace over pressure, depth over distraction, authenticity over approval. Her circle got smaller, but her vision got sharper. There was no dramatic rebirth moment, no big speech, just small, sacred decisions. To leave rooms that made her doubt her worth. To walk away from people who only loved her when she was useful, to stop begging for the bare minimum, to stop chasing potential in others and start believing in her own. She didn't need anyone to tell her she had changed. She could feel it, in the way she no longer explained her no, in the way her silence wasn't fear, it was focus, in the way she was more present with herself than she had ever been with anyone else. This wasn't a break, it was a build, and now she walks differently, not arrogantly, but assured. She talks differently, not louder, but with more weight. She no longer rushes healing, she no longer glorifies suffering. She no longer calls it love when it's really just self-sacrifice. She sees herself differently, not as broken, not as too much, but as a woman who made a decision to evolve regardless of who was watching. And that's what most people never understand about women like her. They see the final result, the confidence, the boundaries, the glow, but they don't see the hours of silence behind it, the nights spent asking hard questions. The tears cried in private, the rejections turned into redirection, the discipline forged in the dark. She wasn't waiting for life to happen. She was preparing to meet it differently, not with desperation, but with direction. Not with fear, but with faith, not for love, but from love. She became the woman she once prayed someone else would be for her. She didn't come back with revenge in her heart. She came back with wisdom in her spirit. Because when a woman grows in silence, something inside her changes that can't be undone. Something shifts so deeply, so permanently, that returning to her old life feels like betrayal to the woman she became. Not because the past wasn't real, but because the person she was back then would never have survived where she's going now. You see, she didn't come back to prove a point. She didn't rise so someone would say, "You were right." That version of her, the one that used to seek closure, to hope for apologies, to silently beg to be chosen, is gone. Not bitter, not angry, just done. And that's the thing most people don't realize about women like her. When she disappeared, it wasn't to manipulate anyone, it wasn't to gain attention, it was because the noise had become too loud to hear herself think. She needed clarity, she needed solitude, she needed the kind of space that heals the nervous system, not just the heart. And once she got it, she started changing in ways that couldn't be undone. The silence became her mirror. It showed her where she'd been too available, too understanding, too forgiving. It showed her the parts of her that gave out of fear, not love. It showed her the pain she was carrying from generations before her. Pain that was never hers to carry in the first place. She processed all of it, privately, without announcing it, without calling it a journey or a phase, without needing anyone to clap for her. And then she did the bravest thing of all. She let go of the woman she used to be. She stopped romanticizing potential, stopped craving chaos, stopped participating in stories where her value was tied to someone else's approval. She no longer felt the need to be chosen, because she had chosen herself. And when she came back into the world, she didn't announce it. She didn't show up louder, she showed up different. There was a calm about her. A stillness, the kind that doesn't need to say much because her energy already says it all. She doesn't ask, "What if they don't like me?" anymore. She now asks, "Do I even like them?" She doesn't bend to make others comfortable. She allows others to rise if they want to meet her. She doesn't lower her standards for connection. She raises her vibration and lets the right people rise with her. That's what silent growth does. It doesn't just change what she wants. It changes what she allows. The invitations she turns down, the conversations she no longer entertains, the apologies she no longer waits for. That's not ego, that's evolution. Because when she healed, she didn't become invincible. She became wise. She still feels deeply, but she doesn't drown in it. She still believes in love, but she's no longer impressed by grand gestures. Now, she watches how people treat themselves, how they handle silence, how they show up when no one's clapping. She doesn't need chaos to feel alive anymore. Peace excites her now, boundaries turn her on, consistency is sexy to her, respect is irresistible. She learned that not everyone deserves a second chance, not because they're bad, but because she's not the same woman anymore. The things that once felt like love now feel like emotional labor. The people she used to chase, she prays for them, but she never looks back, and if they ask what happened to you, she smiles because they wouldn't understand. Because it wasn't one thing, it was everything. It was the nights she cried in silence while still showing up for everyone else. It was the days she gave when her own cup was empty. It was the years she spent loving people who didn't know how to love her back. It was every time she silenced herself just to keep the peace in rooms that didn't deserve her presence. So no, she didn't grow in peace, she grew in pain, but that pain became purpose, and that purpose became power. Now, she's not chasing anything. She doesn't need to prove her worth. She doesn't need someone to love her loudly. She doesn't even need the credit for surviving what she went through, because she knows. She knows who she is. She knows what it took to become her, and she's not going back. She's the kind of woman you feel when she walks in, but you'll never hear her brag. She's the kind of woman who can make you rethink your whole life, with just one boundary. She's the kind of woman who was never soft, she was silent while growing, and the most powerful thing about her, she doesn't need to say a word. Because when a woman grows in silence, she becomes the lesson. So now, when you see her, don't mistake her calm for weakness. Don't confuse her quiet for surrender. Understand this: she fought a war you never saw, and she won it with grace, not noise. She's not here to prove anything. She's not here to beg for love, or explain her silence, or convince anyone of her worth. That season is over, because when a woman grows in silence, she learns something sacred. Not everyone needs to hear her story, only the ones worthy of standing beside the woman who lived it. She walks differently now, not because the world changed, but because she did. She speaks with intention, not because she lacks emotion, but because she honors her peace. She doesn't go where she's merely tolerated. She blooms where she's deeply seen. And maybe they'll wonder why she doesn't come back. Maybe they'll ask why she never reached out. But the truth is, you don't go backward when you've grown in silence. You don't return to what broke you once you've learned how to build yourself. You don't chase love when you've become love. She's not soft. She's not bitter. She's reborn, and she doesn't need to announce her arrival. She is the arrival. So if you're in your silent season now, keep going. If they don't understand your quiet, let them. If they're not clapping for you, keep building anyway. Because one day, just like her, you'll rise from that silence. And no one will recognize you, and that will be the point.